Welcome back. I'm Lisa here with May's Sew Fun. I'm excited to share the next few projects with you. The next thing I want to talk to you about is Laura Heine's The Dress. So you guys might remember that I made Laura Heine collage quilt of peppermint. That was that winter scene, and it had a big reindeer on the front, and then underneath of that was a little town. And I just sort of fell in love with this whole idea of collage quilting. It's like a completely different type of fiber craft. And I loved the dress, this pattern of hers. But I have a great love of Halloween fabric, and I collect Halloween fabric. And I'm always looking for things to use with all this Halloween fabric that I have collected, because eventually you like to make something with the fabrics you have. So I decided to make her into a witch. And that's what I did over here. So this was really fun to do, and it ended up being a great quarantine project because I could just lay it all out and leave it out, because it's not like we're going anywhere or having people over or anything. So it was really fun to go through all of my fabrics and find all these little motifs that I could cut out and fuse on to the pattern. Now, the dress pattern as is does not look like this. I changed it pretty significantly. For one thing, I shrunk it down. This is about 75% size of the original quilt. And I learned a little trick of how to do that really easily. I laid the pattern from the drawing from the pattern out on the floor, and I stood on a ladder and I took a picture of it with my phone. And then I pulled that picture into an Excel spreadsheet and pasted it into cell A1, and then clicked print, and it automatically tiled it for me. And at the top of each page, it had a ruler that showed me how big it was. So I could see how many tiles across it was going to be. And I knew approximately the size I wanted the finished quilt to be. And so I just played around with that until when I was printing it, I could say print at 70% or print at 84%. And then it just printed like 36 pieces of paper, and I just taped them all together, and then I had my pattern. So I did that. And then I added, I drew a hat for her, and I drew the rest of her legs and shoes for her, and just taped those down on a piece of paper and used that as my pattern. So she's about 75% of the size, but I added the bottom of her legs and her feet and her hat. And that was really fun to work out and do. One of the other significant changes I made was her hair. It's not like that in the pattern. So I just cut squiggly lines of various orange and black fabrics. You might remember that the product that we use for these quilts is Steam-A-Seam 2. Now, this is Steam-A-Seam 2 Light that I used for another project, but I wanted to show you that to remind you that for these quilts, this is what you use. The other tool that is super useful is this fusing mat. And I had these in last November when I did the peppermint collage pattern, and they sold out, and we had lots of orders for them. We weren't able to get all in that we wanted, but we have them back in stock now. So if you did not get one of these in November and you want one, you can order one today. So one of the tools that I think is really great is this little teeny tiny pair of serrated scissors. And this is they're called Perfect Scissors by Karen K. Buckley. And they're just so teeny, teeny, tiny. So they were really useful for getting in around lots of little tiny things. So when I was cutting out these little vines and flowers, this little teeny tiny pair of scissors was super useful for that. And they have serrated edges, so they grip onto the edge of the fabric. so the fabric doesn't slide out of the scissors, so that you are able to get a really accurate cut. And the serrated edge really minimizes fraying. And because this is all raw edge applique, you want to minimize that fraying as much as possible. And I use these quite a bit this month for my Sew Fun projects. Another thing that they recommend doing is just doing straight line quilting very close together. So that's what I did. The horizontal lines are a ½ inch apart and the vertical lines are 1 inch apart, because you don't want the quilting to detract from the overall picture. And you also want to sew through, so a line of stitching through as every little applique piece as much as possible. I was pretty excited to make some of the projects in this book. It's called Perfect 10 Quilts. I love to buy pre-cuts. I like jelly rolls, I like fat quarter bundles, I love those charm packs and the 10-inch layer cakes with the 10-inch squares. I don't always know what I'm doing with them, but there's something so appealing about those little stacks of fabric and things like that. And I find that I buy them, and pretty soon I have a handful of these that are just sitting on my shelf looking pretty, and I'm not doing anything with them. So this whole book is quilts that you can make with layer cakes, also known as just 10-inch square packs of fabric. And they have this Perfect 10 quilts, and some of these are just, they're pretty modern looking and bright and fresh, and they are just really fun. I liked this one. It's called the banana quilt. I thought that was really an interesting way to do it. And they give you directions on cutting up your 10-inch squares to make all these designs. This is called the birthday cake quilt. I was a fan of that one. There's one in here called Buttered Pecan, which I thought was really fun. They kind of have all like food names for their quilts. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with that, but that's what they had chosen to do. I really liked the one called Rocky Road. I thought that was really an interesting take. And so they show you how to make the blocks and then arranging different kinds of blocks in different ways to create all these really interesting patterns. Now, this is the quilt that I really fell in love with. It's called the Mint Chocolate Chip Quilt. But when I look at that pattern, that doesn't look like mint chocolate chip to me. It looks like hugs and kisses because it's X's and O's. And I've been slowly making quilts for all of my grandchildren, and I needed a quilt for my little Collins, who is going to be 3 this month. And that X's and O's, hugs and kisses, seemed perfect for her. So I made it out of this fun layer cake that I had, and it's so bright and springy to me. Now the original pattern for this quilt is 80 by 80 inches, which is giant for a 3-year-old. So I cut it down. It was 4 blocks by 4 blocks. I cut it down to 3 by 3. So it's 60 by 60 inches, which I think is plenty big enough for a 3-year-old to snuggle up with and really love. So you make the blocks and arrange them either into the X or the O by how you turn the block. And then you get these big 16-inch blocks for your quilt that you can arrange. What makes these quilts so doable is they have a ruler called the Perfect 10 ruler. It has these grippy things all over the back and on the edge so that they won't slide on your fabric, because when you're working with all those 10-inch squares, You want to make sure that you're cutting really accurately, because it's not like you have yardage to cut more of if you cut it wrong, or that you can trim it differently. You have 10-inch squares. The other thing that made this super great was my Gypsy in-between gripper. Now, I brought these in, oh, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, and you guys snapped them up like they were M&Ms. This is a lifesaver for me with my hands, and it made using this ruler really great. I'm going to show you how that worked. So here's the Gypsy Gripper. You flip up that little lever. You set it down on your ruler at an angle that is going to be comfortable for you to hold. It suctions right on there, and then you just push down the lever and it attaches there, which makes holding this ruler steady on top of the fabric you're cutting and maneuvering it where you want it really, really so much easier than trying to hold on to that 10-inch ruler with your hand. So even though it has the non-slip grippy parts on the bottom, which help immensely, this for me is a game changer. So if you didn't snag one of these when I brought them before, you might want to snag one now, because it just is the best. I love this size. And of the 3 Gypsy grippers I have, this one is my favorite one, the in-between one. I use it over and over again. I move it from ruler to ruler, and it is just a game changer for me. All right, there are several notions that I used when making this quilt that really, really helped that I want to tell you about. A couple of them are these new Creative Grids seam guides. They come in 15-inch and 9-inch, and they have a grippy back so they won't slide around, and they're really great for marking on the diagonal of any piecing that you're trying to do. So you can see I have lots of diagonal marking for this quilt. The points are beveled with the corner angle that you'll need, and they have a center lines, holes that go through the center that you can line up, you can draw through with your fabric marker, and on each side it's exactly a 1/4 inch. So you can line this up with a line that you want to draw, and then be able to mark your 1/4 inch seams along both sides quickly and easily, and it really, really expedites. And I like that it comes in this longer size as well for when you're making big triangles, and so it makes it really easy to mark on that. So these are great. Another really great little notion that I can't believe I didn't invent myself are the magic fork pins. Now, we've talked about these magic pins several times in Sew Fun. They make lots of different kinds, and they're really, really great for a lot of reasons. We've talked about how they're easy to grab, and they have this squishy kind of head, so it's easy to hold on to, and they're very heat resistant. You can iron over them. These ones are really great. It's a forked pin, and it has this wide rectangle head on it that's super easy to grab, and also have a offset bend in them. So when you are piecing and you're matching seams, it's really easy to put those through, because it seems like no matter how careful you are with stitching and pinning, that bottom seam sometimes folds over when you're piecing. And so the fork keeps both sides of that seam in place and securely held. And because it's offset, it's really easy to carefully get right up to the edge of the pin under your presser foot when you're stitching, and grab it and pull that pin out really easily as you're sewing. because it sits up just a little bit off the bed of your sewing machine, so it's easy to grab onto. Super useful. Another great notion are these little nifty needle tubes. Now, this particular tube of needles that we brought for you this month are binding needles. I didn't even know there was such a thing as binding needles, needles made specifically for binding a quilt. This little tube has two different sizes of needles, and the eye is pink, like the top of the tube. So it's really easy to see when you're threading, which I also find really helpful. A little reminder, just like your sewing machine needles, hand needles will eventually get dull or get bent. And getting a fresh needle will make your hand stitching so much smoother and easier and less hard on your hands, which I'm always looking for things that are going to be less hard on my hands. A couple of the other projects that I've done for you today are these two different case sets by Annie. And like all by Annie patterns, while they sometimes can be complex, they're not difficult. Her instructions are really good. The first one I did is called Close at Hand. And this handy little bag was originally designed for medicines, like for diabetes, but I'm going to use it for like a little supply kit. I found this great fabric, and I'll show you some of the cool features of this little bag. It has a handle, has an outer zipper pocket, and like all of her patterns, it uses handbag zippers to make it much easier to install your zippers, and uses soft and stable to give it structure. And when you zip it open, it's got lots of great little mesh pockets. This is a side pocket, and then on top are 3 mesh pockets, and the pockets are bound with fold-over elastic that you can get in a bajillion different colors, and it's super easy to work with. It also has this elastic here to hold a pin or something. 3 pockets over here, this larger pocket that goes all the way down, a gathered mesh pocket, so that if you have something that's a little bulkier than a straight mesh pocket. The mesh has just a little bit of stretch and give to it. So it's nice when you top it with that fold over elastic, it kind of holds things compactly. I like the size of this, and I think it's going to be super useful and cute. The other one that I did by Annie is called Flipping Out. And it's these really cool little storage pouches that can stand upright on your desk to hold all your supplies. It comes in 2 sizes, large and small, and I make both, and I'm going to show those to you. So here I have the large one, and you can see I already have it full of stuff. I had my creative grid seam guides stuffed in here, and I had my little scissors stuffed in here. The inside is lined with mesh pockets that are bound with the fold-over elastic, and then it has a gusset that also has a mesh pocket on the front that you can store things in. You can flip it out and it will stand upright on your table, so all your supplies. So this would be great for carrying knitting supplies because it's tall enough to hold your knitting needles. The large size is tall enough to hold a bottle of wine, so it would make a great gift. And then you just zip it right up, and it has a little loop to carry it around, and you're ready to go. This is the smaller size. And what's kind of nice about how these are constructed, you can see it has the same great pockets on the inside. It just folds right over so that you have easy access to your supplies while you're working. And what's great is the way this is constructed, you only use 1/2 of the zipper. So just you separate the teeth and sew 1/2 of the zipper all the way around like this. Put the zipper pull on at the bottom, you match the 2 ends, and then it just sews up like that on the top. So interesting construction, darling pattern. and useful, and I think they make a fabulous gift. Thanks for tuning in. We have more fun to come and more projects to show you in the next installment.